Hi guys, and welcome back to another Pieandbelle art class. If you would like to come to our regular classes that take place in Leighton Buzzard and Dunstable, please have a look in my bio for my email or my telephone number. So today we're going to look at how we're going to do these eggs. There's a lot of different techniques that go on here. We need to get something that's shiny, which is the actual liquid egg, and we need to get something that has a sheen, which is the egg shells. We're also going to use masking fluid to get white areas and also use the negative effect to get the white areas. So there's lots of different techniques in this, but we're going to get started now. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw out my picture of my eggs, and I'm going to use masking fluid for all those white spots in the egg, the liquid egg, not in the eggshells. I've already done this because I had to wait for it to dry, so that's already put on there, and now I'm going to mix up the colour of the liquid kind of translucent bit of the egg, which I'm going to make with turquoise and brown. Now you can see I've just prepared an absolute ton of water there, and I'm using a very small amount of colour. When I put this colour on, you're going to barely notice it, but it's just to give a little bit of colour so that when I take off those masking fluid bits there will be white beneath. I'm also going to make up a darker version of that, and I'm going to make up a kind of grey colour with the ultramarine blue and the brown, and that's going to be my colour for the shadows of the egg shells in the liquid. And the first thing I'm going to do is wet this entire area. Now I am working around those shells, that's why the drawing part of this is very important. I'm working around the yolk and working around the shells because this turquoisey blue, even though it's very faint, I don't want to be in any of those areas. So you can see I'm putting the colour on, it's barely noticeable. You're going to see it more when I'm putting on this darker tone, but I need it to have that kind of wet base of the very translucent turquoisey blue so that I can start working these other colours over the top, just around the edges. And you can come in at a later point as well and tidy this all up, so don't worry about it too much. So now you can see I'm making an even darker version of that, and I'm going to deposit it, but I am going to play around with it and move that around, so don't worry about it, because when it's wet you can actually kind of maneuver it and put it where you want it to be. So I'm just making sure that that is everywhere I want it to be and moving it. And actually little dark spots are quite lovely, so don't kind of wash it all out entirely. There will definitely be kind of a shadowed area under your yolk, but the biggest shadows I've got on my pictures are beneath the eggshells up the top there, so I'm going to keep going over it with the brush so that I can make sure it stays wet. I don't want any of it to dry out at this point. So whilst I'm working on it, I am still making sure to go up there and work on those areas too. And now you can see that I'm putting that on, and I want that on whilst it's wet. I'm putting it in and I will soften it out, but I want it all in there whilst it's wet so that it kind of does that lovely splay effect. So as I'm adding water there, what happens is that blue and that brown do separate. I don't know if you can really see in this picture, but the blue and the brown do separate off, and you can get little hints of blue or brown, which is really pretty. So that's what you want to happen when you're mixing colours. That's the whole point of mixing colours rather than just buying tube mixed colours, is that when you make them, when you use them, they do separate out and they're really pretty. So I'm just wetting the yolk there because the colour is really quite dark on that top bit there, the shadow effect. So I'm just wetting it around the edge there and making sure that it is a perfect circle, because I don't want the orange to have an effect of that shadow on it. So I have got quite a lot of time. You can see like I'm playing around with it, quite a bit of time to kind of put the colours where I want them to go. Remember, this is fast forwarded a little bit, so as long as you make your paper nice and wet enough and you're using a good quality paper, like 300 grams minimum, then you actually can have enough time to play around with the colour, put it where you want, take it out. So the quality of your paper is, I'd say, more important than the quality of your paints most of the time, because the thicker your paper, the more time you have to kind of play with the colour and take it in and put it in and take it out. So I think that's all dry, that first layer now. So now I'm going to make my yolk up. So I'm going to make plenty of different colours. I'm going to use the yellow ochre, the pink, the red, the yellow. I'm going to just make as many different kind of yellowy tones as I can. So what I don't want to do is make two colours that are pretty much the same. So I think in a minute I darken that kind of mid yellow or something, because yeah, I think I add colour into that because I thought that's pretty much the same colour. So I do start kind of mixing different colours in. I want to have plenty of different colours there. I don't want them all to be the same. So if I mix that yellow in with that colour, I can see that I have now got some different colours, and then I'm going to make much of a kind of pinker version. So I'm just playing around with it really and making as many colours. You might not even use all the colours you make, but the worst thing is trying to make a colour whilst you're midway through doing what you're doing. So now I'm going to apply all water to this entire yolk. Now this yolk also has a little bit of masking fluid on where it's at its shiniest there. So you'll see that it kind of will repel that a little bit where the masking fluid is. But I will rub that off in the next stage, I think. So I'm just painting the whole entire area in with that yellow, and then I'm going to start seeing where I want the darker tones in. Now you can see there I'm drying the paintbrush off with my hands and sucking the colour out, because where that shine is, there is a kind of little lighter area just around it. I'm just checking the picture. Now on the picture it is kind of, there's darks and lights, but also there is a very dark area right beneath the yolk, but that isn't in yellow, that is in a kind of shaded colour, the same as the shades in the white up at the top. So I'm going to put that in next. I'm not going to put that in at this stage. So remember to layer it, don't put in all your stages at the same point. So whereas it is really dark across this bottom bit, it isn't done in a yellow tone, so I'm going to put that in later. So I'm putting in that darker area so that it does go into a darker kind of orange around the base. And if it comes in too dark like that, all you do is kind of wash your brush off, dry it a little bit so it's damp rather than soaking wet, and just push that colour around to where you want it. Now you have a certain amount of time in this yolk, in this first kind of layer, to play around and put colours where you want, but don't think that's it. When you come in for your second layer, you can actually kind of put some more colours in if you feel like the yolk isn't vibrant enough. So if you want to take it a little slower and you don't want to put all your colours in one go, you don't have to. You can put them in multiple layers. You can go as slow or as fast as you want with watercolour. Now you can see there the difference between me wanting a wet brush and wanting a dry brush. So what happens is when the paper starts to dry, the colour will kind of indent into it, and you might have to pre-wet it again if you want to suck that colour out, if you don't do it quick enough. So I'm just adding colour and taking colour away. I do think the yolk is much more kind of orangey in places, so I'm just adding a bit more colour where I want it to be. And you can see I haven't changed up to a smaller brush yet, but I think I do now. So I just think there comes a time where you think I definitely need more control over where that line's going. And I think that's because I'm putting that little weird bit where the yolk kind of is almost escaping. Now, I don't know whether I really needed to put this bit in, but it was in the picture, so I just put it in. To be honest, you could probably just leave that out and it would look perfectly normal anyway. So the problem with masking fluid is that it is slightly turquoise in hue unless you buy the clear one, which is really impossible to know where the hell it is on your picture. So when you're doing it like this, you don't really know when you've got to the point where you're happy with it until you take the masking fluid off. So what you might find is once this layer is dry, you take the masking fluid off and actually you see that you need to bold it up or darken it in different places, and that's fine as long as you can work around that kind of light source. Most of the colour will be in, so you'll be able to play around with it a little bit at that stage anyway. And I think I'd realised that my my kitchen towel had got pretty gross by that point, so I did change up for a new piece. So at this point I am just rubbing off all the masking fluid. You can see all that shine on the egg now. And I'm going to make another shadow colour. Now you can see I've still got all my colours for the egg there. I didn't get rid of them when I got nice new clean water. I didn't get rid of my colours there. That's because I thought I probably would end up adding a little bit more of that colour into the yolk. So I left them there to reuse a bit later because they were already made. So I'm just making a nice kind of grey tone up here. And what I'll do is kind of like, you'll see in a minute when I'm using it, I will kind of twist my brush in it to get a nice twisted sharp point of my brush whilst I'm using the paint. And I'm getting that shadow in underneath the yolk there. So I've put it in, and then I'm going to start pulling it out until it's not quite so bold. Using the kitchen towel and using water to soften out that colour, but I do want it to have that kind of shadow. And this is the difference between putting the shadow in and getting it soft like I did with those top shadows, and actually controlling it to go exactly where I want it with this bottom one. So you can do it either way. So I am going to give myself a little bit more definition to this kind of white of the egg, so I'm coming round with some darker colour around the edges, just to kind of give it a little bit of something so that you can see it a bit more, but only very small amounts of colour you can see there, and then I'm going to wash them out into the white. And you can see how much difference it does make to get those shadow sources in. Does make it look a lot more 3D. And now I'm going to neaten up the shape of the eggs, because it's like got the shadow in already. I can just put that shape in with the dark, and it just becomes kind of part of that cast shadow, but also neatens up that kind of shape of the eggshell. You can also shape that shine that was made with the masking fluid there, which was like a little kind of shimmer shine around the base of that egg, but it kind of wasn't the right shape, so I've just kind of corrected that. And I think I just correct that shape of that base there and push some of that colour around. So when you're working with this yellow, do play around with it, but remember, once you get it to a certain point you can kind of tap it out, but don't wait too long to tap it out. Push the colour around where you want it. If you tap it out fairly quick before the colour's seeped into the paper, it will just tap it off to the colour beneath. If you wait too long and let the water soak in a little bit, what will happen is you'll just tap out the original colour you put in there. So be careful with how much you kind of pull out with the kitchen towel. So now I'm actually going to make the colour of my eggshells. So I'm going to use yellow ochre, pink, red and blue, and I'm just going to mix them around. And I don't think I actually make enough of this colour in a minute. I think I realise halfway through that I've not made enough, so I have to make more. So probably I would advise you to make a bit more colour than I do. But I'm mixing it about till I get kind of dirty peachy colour for my kind of eggshell browny colour. And I'm wetting in the shape of my broken shell, and then I'm going to start putting in the colour at the darkest point of the eggshell, so where it's at its darkest, and then push it around into the lighter areas. The reason being that if you put it in the darkest area first, if the colour does end up staining that area, that's your darkest area anyway. You don't want that to be the lighter point. So I'm putting the colour in, pushing it around, and you can see how I'm getting that nice two-tone effect, and it's kind of splaying out. And again, remember, like I always say, those edges you can come in and correct a little bit later. This one I'm putting the whole colour in, and this will be very much what I'm talking about with the sheen, because this egg you can definitely see the kind of sheen of it. So I'm going to deposit colour in and also take it out. I think this is when I realised I ran out of colour and had to make some more pretty sharpish. But what I'm going to do is put the colour in and deposit areas of the darker colour, and then I am going to use my brush and suck it out across the top and side so that I can make that lighter effect. Now I've worked that colour pretty fast, but really you want to do that before, because you obviously want the whole thing to stay wet whilst you're doing it. So it was darker in the middle, darker around the bottom, and then the top left and very top of it were really light. So I'm depositing colour where I see dark, fixing that shape, and then I'm going to add water like that and tap it out to give myself that light source. Now you can, if you want a little bit more control over where you're tapping out, you can use a cotton bud. That works equally as well. And I'm shaping those light sources, you can see, and making them round. And I know I want to bring in a little bit more colour around that base, but I'm working in it whilst it is still wet. So make sure you do pre-wet your little egg shape before you start putting any colour in, because it does give you that amount of time to play around with it that you wouldn't have otherwise if you just applied the colour directly to your paper. So now I'm just correcting that back edge. I think there was a little kind of splodge coming out of that, so I'm just correcting it up, making sure it looks more circular. But again, you can wait and come and bring in colour later and sort that out as well. So now I'm doing that final egg. I'm actually going to turn my board around just to make life a little bit easier for myself, because it's a very fine little strip of that colour. And again, I'm putting the colour in firstly where it's at its darkest, and then pushing it into the lighter areas. And you can see that I'm actually just using the small brush for this entire piece because it's such a thin little area. And now I'm trying to fix the shape of that middle one, because I realised that that middle one wasn't circular either. So I'm definitely putting the colour in, and then, as I always do, kind of fanning it out so that it actually goes into the rest of it. Now what I'm doing is making up the inside kind of colours. So there's definitely a yellowy portion of the inside of those eggs, which is where there's a little bit of liquid in there, and then there's a peachy bit that goes into the top, much more pinky version of that colour. So I'm going to put that pinky colour in first, but there's definitely an idea of the curve, so I'm going to push it around, and then I'm going to dab out with a kitchen towel to make one side be more light so that it looks like there is a kind of spherical effect. And what there is around the edge of this is white, in exactly the same way there is like white bits missing out of the liquid of the egg. There's white around the edges of this where the eggshell is broken, and I'm just going to use this as a negative. I'm going to leave this as a negative. You'll see it more on this one. If you look at the crack of the egg now, look, I'm going to work that around but leave that white negative. Instead of putting masking fluid in, it's just easy to follow that shape where I want it to go. So you can see I'm leaving that little white area, which is where the broken eggshell is, all down that right hand side of that. And again, there's much more colour to one side of this because it's a spherical object, so the colour is much more to the right hand side of that, and then it gets lighter around that left hand side. Now this base bit goes much more yellowy at the bottom, so I'll put that in a minute. That's where the liquid is, and within that egg it kind of makes it a lot more yellowy toned. So I'm going to put that in, but it is softened into that top area as well, so I'll put that in now if you see what I mean. Kind of use a little bit of mustard and a little bit of the yellow, and I put that colour in, but then I will soften it into that so it hasn't got that harsh line so much, because it doesn't really have a definite harsh line in the picture, it kind of softens into that pinky colour above, so I do kind of wash them together. Right there you can see I'm just washing it over that other colour, so it does combine the two, because it doesn't really have a brilliant separate line. So now I'm just making up that eggshell colour, and I'm going to use my little brush to put in those little kind of weird cracky bits around the outside edge, which I wanted to wait until I've done the inside kind of colour. So if you see now, and you see again, I'm doing that where I twist the brush into the paint so that I get a nice pointed edge of the brush. And I'm putting those eggshell-y broken bits in and then pushing that colour around with some water and just getting rid of it and reshaping that one a little bit. So this is where I'm kind of using my fine brush to really help myself out, getting that shadow in of the other egg. I'm just softening it all together. So really I'm just getting in those fine details now. So you can definitely see the difference between using the paint and sucking the paint out to get yourself that sheen, and literally leaving big white bold spots like you do on the liquid egg to get a shine. So the difference between a shine and a sheen is the difference between leaving a spot completely negative or using the masking fluid, or just sucking it out with a paintbrush, because when you suck it out with a paintbrush it's a much softer effect, and also it does leave a very, very small amount of the colour deposited underneath. So on that sheen there is a very, very slight colour of peach beneath. And I was just bringing out that little eggshell back because you couldn't really see it that well, so I'm just putting the colour in and tapping it out so it gives it a bit more of a definition around it with the white background. And I think we're basically done now. To give myself some idea of the liquid in there. And that is it. Your finished picture. I hope you enjoyed that one, guys. Speak to you soon.